Yeah.
Wait, what did your mom say? Go upstairs to listen.
Someone's logging
We'll be
in.
quiet.
How do you
Should we
know?
just say-
Oh,
And we are here tonight to welcome our Mamaroneck local organizer, activist, and educator who is here to speak to us about a very, very timely addition to our literature. It is called Justice Unplugged. And Mr. Quiros says he could never be a bystander. Others had to know the history of resistance and thriving spirit and come together amid the chaos. Never a truer word was spoken. Mr. Quiros, we welcome you to speak.
Thank you, and I'm welcoming everyone here, and thanks for joining us. I have with me Gisela Marroquin, the editor of Justice Unplugged, and I have from the West Coast, the illustrator, Sandra Cruz. And between the lines, there is Charlene McKay, and also hopefully listening on, and I hope she is Nicole, one of my students from the past that's still in the present. As I have enormous respect for justice through the arts and interdisciplinary education, I continually apply to myself to acquiring young artists, using many forms of canvases into my life, home, and classroom. This is how Sandra came to be the illustrator of this book. And I want to emphasize, I apply myself. I just don't try to reach out. It takes work to find young people that chime and being an artist. Sandra, using the pictures shown in Justice Unplugged, including the cover, competed in a project with Nike. Serena Williams, in collaboration with Nike, formed a team of emerging New York City designers to create a range of Serena-inspired footwear and apparel through 2020. After a narrow selection process, the applicants were narrowed to 10 designers, relocated and invited to the Nike World Headquarters in Oregon to begin a 7-month apprenticeship that will culminate in the capsule project. And that is our illustrator, and she was one of my students in the class that Nicole was also in, and the name of that course was Race, Class, and Gender. Another artist featured in Justice Unplugged is Yasuyo Tanaka. Over the years, collected discarded keys make etching plates. Yasuya intersects with other global conflicts for reflection and now connections. All things are linked. To this end, Yasuya completed a series of 365 different keys and backgrounds, and I quote her, "Every day, each one of us is opening the door of an unknown world to search for the meaning of our life. Knowing the purpose of our life is noticing the existence of keys inside ourselves. We can choose now how to use our keys." Then my mentor, Dr. John Hope Franklin. His reputation as a scholar was made in 1947 with the publication of his book, From Slavery to Freedom, A History of African Americans, which is still considered a definite account of the Black experience in America. He also became the recipient of a Medal of Freedom. I loved this man, and being with him and traveling with him and laughing with him was made my life, capsuled my life for what it is today. Justice Unplugged, as with my first book, Another's Mind, brings all readers through an experience that is unavoidable. Unlike academia, which depends on professors reaching for tenure and books published mainly from the community in power, my book takes the risk that true democracies must have. Starting with the personal risk, which I witnessed growing up in Harlem and born in 1945, people like John Carlos. You see, he'll be popping up soon. John Carlos in the 1968 Olympics. There he is with his holding my book, Another's Mind. He was the one that put for the younger people, possibly, he put his fist up in the air. A symbol such as Kate Kaepernick today. And Muhammad Ali, who I often saw in the streets of Harlem, and others all the way to the present. Throughout the pages of Justice Unplugged, you are in this dialogue, living the history of the present state. Talk radio captured, tested, and validated many of us what we have been thinking. Through silent, though silent, a deeply rooted cultural clash against the values believed to be practiced under equality, democracy, and freedom. Before we go on to the next page, you can see Santa Cruz, and in my classroom a few years ago, I was wearing the Kaepernick football jersey. I would like to play the following clip for you. Here's where talk radio as testimony comes in for reflection and grounding of what was true prior to Trump. So not only do you have the pages, but the pages come to life and are tested in a conservative market. A year is April 14th, 2017. The topic is healthcare. We're just giving this a second just to set up, and you'll be listening to it pretty quickly.
Objective and said, what do we need to do?
Nobody wants to fix the problem.
Can they hear it? Can you all hear it?
It cut out. It played for.
Yeah, right now it's stopped.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They only want to win the points. That's very clear, Bob.
Well, I see that even in domestic disputes. I often, where I'm often felt, I have to say, are you trying to win the argument or solve a problem? They're different things.
Yeah. You know, someone once said to me in a personal relationship, would you rather be right or happy? And it comes down to we, the American people, should have these problems resolved for us, and they're not being resolved.
No, they're not being resolved.
And I see no real, you know, I listen to the media.
But it's our fault.
I know it is. I know. We've allowed them to get away with it. Although these town hall meetings taking place now are becoming so difficult for the Republicans, they can't even have them anymore. It's becoming a big issue. So, a couple of other things I want to talk about, Bob, that are...
But you do have a call. Now, we have 3 different Lou's who called the show.
Good morning,
I don't know which one this is. Good morning. You're on WVOX. Thank you for calling. You're with Dr. Sternberg.
Hey, Doctor. I'm the Latino Luis.
Hi,
yeah, well, Louis, that's
Good morning,
Quiros.
Luis.
He does a show with us on Monday nights.
Great, Luis. Thanks for calling.
Yeah. One of the things that I mentioned, and I mentioned it academically and streetwise in my classes, because I'm interdisciplinary in the humanities and intersuburban, I actually bring to my students a lot of material that explains how this nation, the United States, has an epidemic of mental illness and how it exposes it on just a minute-by-minute basis. What is
I'm sorry, we'll get going this again if you can hear me. Well, what is being said, I'm going to continue without it, is I declared that the conditions of the United States today demonstrate an enormous amount of mental illness as an epidemic. The conversation with this doctor continued. He totally agreed with me as I do it in front of all the students, as I mentioned it to the student body. And at the end, he's through the joint conversation, he indicated that this country is missing, for not being alert and conscious, it's missing an epidemic of a flu that should be arriving in about 3 years that would kill, where hundreds of thousands of people will die from this flu. Now, this was back in 2017, and I'm sorry that we're missing the connection, but if you're interested, the connection it's in my website. Email me and I'll tell you how to get to it yourself. But that was over 3 years ago. And this epidemic keeps rising in different forms. Now, a hard right Trump administration was sworn in despite the larger number of popular votes received by Hillary Clinton. That to me is part of an epidemic that's wrong with either having a democracy or a fake democracy. On January 28th, 2015, I hosted the first talk radio episode, which I called Q's Justice Unplugged, on WVOX 1460 AM. I spoke then with language that would ignite the dialogue. If this country had a Trump candidate, enough Trump voters and momentum around the ideals he never hid behind, than it was needed to have a Trump president. And this is what I meant by putting ourselves at risk. A Clinton presidency would have detoured and delayed the never dealt with chapters of history and the aftermath of slavery. I mentioned that, and it's what I call it a very risky statement, but I stood by it. And on June 15th, 3 days ago, in the New York Times, an article came out entitled "How Trump is Fueling Progressivism." Early in Trump's presidency, Neera Tatum, the president of the liberal think tank, the Center of American Progress, argued that his election, Trump's election, had widened the aperture of American politics. Her point was that the public's appetite for change was bigger than many elites had realized, and that liberals should also respond ambitiously. Justice Unplugged, as a book, took this talk radio dialogue and again testimony of mindsets that make up this country and evolved into a journey of capturing narratives for critical thinking, analysis, and action. I also want to make clear that I did not vote for Trump. I was a Bernie Sanders follower and worker. And if you read the Journal News this week in Westchester, an article came out and actually quoted me as a Trump, mentioned me as a Trump, as a Bernie supporter, and how and what conditions exist today. Now, creating Justice Unplugged required loving the stranger and asked personhood to think a lot about the phrase reporting what is suspicious. Namely, people viewed as the other, which is my first book, Another Spine. The book examines both language we use and how we are taught that language. The language of democracy versus fake democracy has a different meaning to those impacted by policies and those who define policy. The concept of the other, covered in Another's Mind again, related to communities of color and people in the margins. Now, this concept is capturing a broader community because of the narrowness of white supremacy. Now, a picture will be coming on. Here you see Hillary and Donald Trump, and to get an illustration by Sandra Cruz. Though I supported Hillary for trying to diminish patriarchal society we live in, it does not change the fact that she holds her head too high and ignores important issues, whereas Trump boldly exposes them all and uncovers the true injustices that have been occurring. Trump's methods of exposure are questionable, but he makes the people of America aware of how hateful, racist, and wrong they are. And in the article that I was quoted in Westchester, it referred to my comments that the only way out of this mess was to include a bigger circle of people. And when more white people are involved in bad policy, the conditions change. The shackles, as for none others, life has built in none others, those that are not viewed as others, but the elite. As for none others, life has built in the privilege of planning and taking leisure time. Even further, none others assume others have a predisposition as animal laborants. That's from Karl Marx. Not of our own ability to think and plan, but because of our natural position, our destiny as laborers, as defined within a state of enslavement. The reality is that most others do not recognize that freedom is far more complicated than simply not having to work. The shackles from the privilege continue. Since 1492, this nation had validated that the villain behind the curtain is not a person, it's a class. We should be aware that lockdown conditions not only exist in the public sphere, but also exist in the private sphere. As the private sphere assumes that wealth and status buys them their freedom. Education, I include as an accomplice in Justice Unplugged. Scholars should work in a more interdisciplinary environment to create wisdom solely for justice. Among the highest risk an educator must take in these United States is holding language and words accountable when necessary, and adding supplements to eliminate assumptions. Language has become more important as actions have exposed all the isms and the ills of this society. Please take a look at the screen, and you can see the artwork that we depend on, and how language and history, the written language, has been created in myth to the advantage of those in power, the none others. To succeed in these classrooms, we needed to work on words, or mold words outside of the definitions that those in control use. Solinsky paraphrased that those that write the definition control the results. Until the vocabulary comes in concert with what history states, social economics has ascertained and actual social scenarios can validate. Let me give you an example of what I just said. If one does not have access to services, those services do not exist. We consistently hear from the non-others how this country provides services, shelters, etc., food banks. But the real definition, and what I've given you, is that if you don't have access to service, if you don't have access to a shelter that is safe and clean, that shelter does not exist. It's about holding words accountable. Reference to this nation's constitutional writers and founding fathers is another example instead of authors. I personally do not refer to the founding fathers of this country. They didn't include me, and they didn't include millions of other people. What they are is authors. Defining them as actual authors as opposed to founders automatically enhances the critical thinking and dialogue. Another example, lack of differentiating between the oppressor and the liberator, or when the oppression commences in dialogue, especially at conferences, panel discussions, and the classroom. This has too many of the others thanking the privileged community for a not so bad oppression. As a professor of race, class, gender, social work, social policy, and practice myself a victim of this area's racism, I must concur wholeheartedly with the signs of an epidemic of mental illness that evolves when a community endorses themselves better than the other. I also want to highlight that the most beautiful experiences of my life have been in this fight for justice is being in the communities with others and in seeing our tremendous amount of talent, love, and perseverance. I wrote these books as part of a journey of self-reflection and extensions of my organizing. Justice Unplugged, while capturing hard conversations and comments on the airwaves, also captures the encounters and the conversations I had that led me to places like Cuba, Brazil, and Italy to engage with global communities of others, also in pursuit of social justice and defending their Black and queer identities. This book has much of the testimony scholarship as it does illustrations, pictures, case studies, and narrative. Writing has allowed me to share the raw emotion and vulnerable pieces of myself, and I am honored that both the editor and the illustrator share their commitment, and we produced this book in honor of that. And I'm now open, and I would love the continuation of conversations and questions, because as the book does, as both of my books do, I did take the risk, and the risk became obvious when questioned as to why I mentioned such things that, for me, for example, I was asked, how did globalization start? And this was an actual experience in the classroom in the United States. And I said globalization in the United States started with slavery, the Mid-Atlantic slavery trade. Believe it or not, a lot of the students did not like it, and I was, it was brought to the attention of people above me, but I will never change to that. We can't figure out that globalization started with slavery, and when Europe got here, then we only got the mental illness. In questions, if no questions, please feel free to share your narrative, because when I went to Brazil with a stranger, I met a stranger, we developed a relationship, we ended up going to Brazil together, and his long history of slavery was passionately painful. It was extremely painful. And to this day, he has regretted his ancestors, generations, hundreds of years of their involvement with slavery to the present day today. And I saw the churches they build. I saw roofs that this is also written and pictures shown in the book Justice Unplugged, that roofs were made out of mold from slaves' legs, and that was the mold. And richer homeowners were able to use the same mold for the leg, and the poorer ones, it didn't matter what leg they used, and they got a lot of leaky roofs. So these experiences are missing in our education. Education, to me, is a major accomplice of not being able to bring out the necessary language, the necessary words to correct an epidemic that I feel and that has proven out during the year 2000. Again, this is listed in my book. Students would ask me, how the United States is going to look for 50 years from now? And my response has always been, I don't see the United States around 20 years from now if they don't deal with the issues of slavery. If they don't, they have yet to touch the topic of slavery. They have yet to understand slavery is the worst part of slavery is that people actually think they can do that. Is the labor is horrible, the conditions is horrible, but to think that people can hold people under enslavement and they have a right to do that, that is among the worst. And I am quoting and read all the articles many of the books of Hannah Arendt, Malcolm X, and that in itself is the true epidemic of this nation. Again, the lines are open now, and I welcome your conversation or your comments or anything you want to say. You're on.
Mr. Quiros, everybody's muted, so you will have to unmute people, but I have a question. Actually, two questions.
Go ahead.
My first question is, is how do we go forward?
We go forward by being vigilant. We go forward by when we see something wrong, not to discuss it and name it. We create vigilance and action to stop that to stop that momentum, that negative momentum going in. And it starts in elementary schools. It starts in first grade, second grade, third grade, junior high school. As you know, here in Mamaroneck, we have serious racial issues here in the school district. We've had them for many, many years, and they don't go away. This is a problem. And they go away because, and it's not just the parents, it's education is an accomplice here. We're living out the history of this nation. We still talk about America like if it was the United States. Every time I hear the word America, when I know they mean the United States, it's again, we go back to the language. It's not, Mexico as much as America as the United States is America. We don't learn about other. My founding father is more of a Simon Bolivar than it is those that we have to study here. Does anybody ask the question why the founding fathers, as far as authors, if they didn't found me? They didn't find most of the people. They didn't find 30 million people that were here already.
That's a lot of us.
Yes.
So there's a question.
I have a question here.
It's about language is so important, and so are narratives. Justice Unplugged discusses experiences. How would you guide us through the brink of a civil war?
If you're saying that we're in the midst of a civil war, I think we've been in that brink for a few hundred years. I just think it's exposing itself, mainly because of the type of president that we have now, and we're seeing that action happen. When you go, when the narratives I have in the book, and if you go to my radio talk show plugs that I have them all in here, you will hear students call me a anarchist, that I'm an anarchist, and even call the station asking them to take me away from the air. So the way around this is to first of all acknowledge that this is not a present situation. This has been going on forever, and if we would have had anybody else but Trump, I think that civil war would have come, but too late, and the devastation would have probably destroyed the United States. One of the things that we need to follow is the economic condition of this country. I don't know how some states are going to get out of this financial mess. I don't know. I will not. I am not surprised, and that's one of the things that I always tell my students. If something surprises you, you've been asleep. You haven't been reading. You've been taking care of yourself. Nothing that has happened today should have surprised anybody. But yet, you can see that it has. I don't know if another writer, or never mind, no professor would ever say what I said in the classroom, that the Trump factor is going to change this the conditions that needed to be changed. As much as I dislike that man, and if you were to listen to the rest of the talk radio segment that I had on, you would have seen how I described Trump, a bad man galore. But why did it have to go to this level? Hillary and other Democrats, to me, they're all the same. They're neoliberals. The historical patterns are always there for us. We ignore them, and we're coming down to the state where I don't see how we're going to eliminate some form of revolution, which has been going on for a long time. Now it's becoming obvious because it's including more white people, and I say it often. Until white people are included in a negative fashion, negativity doesn't change. white people expedite what should have been done many, many years ago when we widened the circle, which is the essence of the article that appeared in the New York Times today. And now people are becoming surprised. I have another comment here.
There's a new wave of conversation around racism towards our Black community in the United States and around the world. To what extent do you feel this will have a significant long-term impact?
One of the things that I like about Malcolm X, one of the things that I appreciate about Malcolm X during my era when I was alive, and I was less than a block. I was across the street at the moment that he was killed, in Medical Center on 168th Street. One of the things that I appreciate about Malcolm X, that before blaming anyone else over the racism in the country, he blamed the Black people themselves. I think you should all read a speech he wrote, which is one of my favorite speeches, the Ballad and the Bullet, I think it's called, and also Hannah Arendt, that blamed, I took a risk and blamed the Jewish people for a lot of the Holocaust, and she was prosecuted for that, and it was sad. But here's a brilliant mind who taught at Columbia University. I have read many of her books. It's another author. But here we have Malcolm X and Hannah Arendt dealing with the racism, but they look at themselves first. They look at their own community first. And then we have the global perspective, the issue of boundaries. How a river defines a boundary. I see a river and people see a boundary. It's again, Karl Marx had indicated, as humans, we must work. We must to have the history. You've got to have a life. Okay, so I'm trying to deal with the question here. And around the world, it goes back to the issue of capitalism, that as long as capitalism operates, operates as it does Adam Smith, his famous line, what's it called, the hidden hand, the invisible hand. There is no invisible hand. Those that they're controlling the water, they're controlling the assets, they're controlling the resources. I think we're in the midst of a world that the long-term impact has to be rethought. Unless we do this soon, there will be no long-term impact. There'll be no long-term planet. This is not a conversation for a long-term discussion. This conversation is already late. So I've referred to it. I don't have the page number in another's mind, but there are plenty of facts that tell us that forget about long term. Like when people ask me how is the United States going to look at 2050, my response is, what makes you think it's going to get to the year 2020? It's not going to get there. No way will it get there. No way will the planet get there. The planet can't survive at the rate that we're going.
We have another question. Sorry, let me go back up. Can you talk about the link between capitalism and white supremacy? Do we need to be anti-capitalist in addition to challenging white supremacy?
No, I don't. I think anti-capitalism or socialism, what we need is a hybrid, which is what the United States has. Police officers that get paid, it's also socialism. Anybody that gets paid from tax dollars is a form of socialism. No one economic formula is valid. What we need today are hybrids that perform the most important moral action that we can all have. is provide every human being with human dignity. Everyone's entitled to have their history through human dignity. And there is no way that we haven't figured out that poverty around the world and in the United States is a strategy. People are not poor because they don't want to work. It is a strategy. Poverty is planned. It's not an accident. It's not because some people are lazy. It is the systemic, and it has to change. How can people in Latin America, for example, be poor and hungry? They've got the greatest fruits, natural resources in the world. They don't need to go anyplace else. But why do they have to come here? What we need is hybridity. We also need more artwork. We need young people to get involved with art. We need like the illustrator Sandra Cruz. We've got young people that are creating all kinds of art. And Yasuyo Tanaka, who's with me in this and in this book, who I've known for many years, what she does going around the world dealing with issues in Palestine. It's beautiful to watch. And among the language that we need is to understand that in order to have a language, we also have to understand that the absence of policy is a policy. Let me say it again. The absence of policy is a policy. A person that is suffering is also suffering because there's a lack of a policy that's not correcting that error. Human dignity is mandated on every human being. There is no language that can take that away from any human being. They have a right, not a privilege, to that lifestyle. And to say, again, going back to language, and to say that the American dream is a sick one. What makes you think that only in the United States people work hard? Where's the American? You meet those people around the world, or in Latin America or in Puerto Rico, don't dream? You got to come here. You got to come here for that. But now that we have this COVID-19 virus, guess one of the countries that they're going to try. It's starting to come out in the paper, and I'm not surprised because they did it before in Guatemala with the syphilis testing. Now they're looking at Puerto Rico to test all the potential saviors to the COVID virus, and now they're looking at Puerto Rican women like they did for sterilization. One of the reasons during my mother's age, at my mother's age, when she was 14, 15, and 16, and 17, the United States was literally forcing sterilization on the community there. Now, 2020, we're looking at this COVID virus, the potential saviors to countries like in Puerto Rico and other parts of the poor world. How long how long is this going to last? It's not going to last. It's wrong. It is wrong. It is wrong by all ways that are possible. And this has to change, and it will change. I think I have another good question, Kevin. The invisible hand, I dealt with that. And it's also interesting. I was born in 1945, my father came from Venezuela, Caracas. And it's interesting because my grandfather, who I never met, from Venezuela, my father's father, had a doctorate degree from one of the greatest universities in the world from Venezuela, the Venezuelan University. And he had a doctorate in a PhD in social sciences. And it's sort of striking to me that here we have that people actually think that we come here for our education. But when my father came from Venezuela, I remember him going for a degree in engineering at City College, one of the best colleges in the United States for engineering especially. And he used to come home and really get upset at the United States. And he said, this country is so arrogant. They're teaching me something in physics that I had in high school. That what he knew, he was already speaking French and Spanish and English already. He spoke French, but that's what he took in his private school in Caracas. And the engineering courses that he had here at City College in those years, he couldn't believe how weak they were and how of a non-learning environment the students there, were accustomed to. My mother in Puerto Rico, same thing, came highly educated. My aunts are doctors. My cousins are doctors. And the educational components in Puerto Rico, in many parts, compared to, are way beyond what we're hearing in the inner city. And then we look at segregation. By definition, a zip code is segregation. You actually think that the social distancing is new? What do you think? What do you think country clubs are? Social distancing. What are zip codes? Social distancing. What is it when I used to go to the drugstore in Harlem and I was asked to get up because a white person was coming? I had to get up and give them the seat. I would have done it for an older person, but I stared at the guy. I said, what are you talking about? What was social distancing when I used to go to Palisades Amusement Park and anybody they had a brown bag, anybody darker than a brown bag couldn't swim in that swimming pool. Social distancing is not new. There is nothing new about there is nothing new about the illusions of what's happening in the United States today. There's nothing. Social distancing is not new. What are prisons for? Social distancing. Why do they ask you to report something suspicious? Well, that's me you're reporting, and
We have another question.
go ahead.
Connecting the dots, a point that you always drove home in our classes. I feel that besides protests, the only way we're going to truly address a government that does not work for us all is through major progressive reform and policy. We already know that Republicans outright reject it, but I feel Democratic establishment has only recently begun to embrace some of it. Do you believe the answer lies in removing big money out of politics so that regular working class citizens have a fighting chance to get elected and affect change?
Okay, how much time do I have? Not much, right?
Not much.
I think the Supreme Court has to reverse that Citizens United. When Citizens United was passed, where the corporations could endorse a politician, that made corporations, it was like that anyway, but that really created a mess. That made corporations more powerful than people. Yeah. So it starts with that reversing it. I don't look for politics. Sometimes when I'm at meetings and say, well, we could invite this politician and this politician could join us. If you had it my way, I wouldn't want any politician near me. Because they haven't done it before. They're only coming in order to get votes after the voting is done. Nothing of essence happens anyway. Sovereignty belongs to the people. Period. It belongs to the people. Sovereignty belongs to the people. Looking at politicians is not it's not the way to go. Westchester Democrats are conservative anyway. Mm-hmm. Look at it's not a coincidence that Westchester is the highest tax region in the United States. How is that possible? Well, we're paying for lawsuits. We're paying for social distancing without COVID. We're paying for bad policy. We have apartments not far from where I am, selling at $4,000 a month. Renting for $4,000 a month for one bedroom. You got to be kidding! They are creating a social distance with those that can't afford it, and anything that you buy has the wrong price on it. We don't even know what a real price should be. The price of anything has price of a politician. It has, it doesn't compute what it costs to get the product there. What you're paying for has lawsuits. Every price of what you're paying for is a social issue. It's just new names we're coming up with, and we have to be alert to that.
So
And-
another question you have is, when you say that poverty is a plan, who designed the plan and who is executing it?
The plan is designed by those in power, those that came from Europe. It started with the Eurocentric movement landing here. Those that landed here, James Baldwin, who I read a lot, and also a Harlemite, had a speech once over the bombing of a church in Birmingham, and he said that that in order to protest that, we should not buy any toys for Christmas. We help our own demise by being shop crazy, by buying, by going to shopping centers. We need to understand that every dollar you spend is a social issue. That we can't continue buying products that deprive people of their livelihood. In the United States, the cash register keeps it going. So stop spending money. Deal with the necessities of life, and understand that when you're buying a product, you're also putting someone else out of it doesn't work the way it's working now. Those in power are controlling our destiny and putting us many into poverty. How can you have salaries of $30 million? I was in the talk show that you couldn't listen to because we couldn't get it through. That same week, Manning, the quarterback, was complaining that he wasn't making enough money. That same week. It's crazy. When is enough enough? In this country, enough is never enough. We always want one more dollar. So who's controlling it? We have a lot to do with it. We buy things and throw them away. We buy things and throw away. And they're not around that long. We waste food. We do a lot of things we shouldn't do it. So like, so we got to look at ourselves, because we expedite issues of poverty.
Closing out.
Excuse me?
We're closing out. I'm going to share the.
Okay, we're closing out, and Justice Unplugged is an artistic statement, a mosaic of philosophy, narrative, and history. Hoping this pushes us into action, into more dialogue. Visit the website. You can contact me, for any conversation, questions, and the book. Any other pending questions? For me, the classroom is so much easier. I'm not used to this. And my students help a lot. Thank you for showing up. Lori, we good?
Oh, I think Lori's still on mute.
I can't hear you, Lori.
Sorry, Lori, I don't know why. Thank you so much, everyone. Keep fighting the good fight.
Fight the good fight.
There we go.
And you're part of it.
My cat's tail is in the way. Get out of here. Bye-bye.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
hi, Monica.
Hi.
Bye. Bye, Yasuya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hello. You did fix it so I could unmute myself. I would just like to thank you, Mr. Quiros, for coming to speak for us and explaining your book to everybody. As I said to begin with, most timely. You are in the right place at the right time. Go forward.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you all.
Yes. Have a good evening, everybody.
Okay.